Yo, what's going on, guys? And today we'll be discussing, of course, the Minnesota Timberwolves season preview and predictions for the 2025-26 season. If it's your first time watching this, let me know down below in the comment section what are your thoughts, expectation, and predictions for the T-Wolves this year. Look, when we first got Karl-Anthony Towns and Rudy Gobert and Anthony Edwards together, I know Cat got hurt, but it took like 18 months for that to gel. And as a result, the second season was better. Hey, first season with Julius Randle, we got to the same spot where we were with Karl-Anthony Towns. So shouldn't we expect an improvement? If you guys didn't know, I was born in St. Louis Park. I know. A Jew born in St. Louis Park. Lived there. Moved to Pryor, like near Chanhassen. And then at 5 moved to Florida. Then at 9 to Baltimore, then 19 Kansas, and now back to Florida. But either way, didn't need to give you a synopsis of my, locations of living. Let's talk about the Minnesota Timberwolves, who look to remain in contention and finally basically get the monkey off their back and make a final appearance. Also, will Anthony Edwards finally reach that MVP level that we've seen him play around at but never sustain for like a whole playoff or a whole season? But we've seen it, and that's what we're betting on, like him going from all NBA to top 3, top 5 player. And I think the team's hypothetically deeper, and they should be able to stay in the West upper tier. So like, comment, and subscribe. Minnesota enters 2025-26 as Tim Conley returns as president. They got to work out an extension with him, but they're a team straddling two paths, built to win now with Rudy Gobert and Julius Randle as the co-stars to Anthony Edwards, but also preparing for the future with young pieces like Rob Dillingham, rookie Joan Beringer, and Jalen Clark, Terrence, Shannon. Leonard Miller, Rob Dillingham can also be thrown in there, but obviously Anthony Edwards, Ant, remains the centerpiece, a rising superstar with MVP aspirations. So this offseason, they were able to re-sign Julius Randle and Reid. Joe Ingles surprisingly was brought back. I really just thought he was going to retire. I'm going to be honest. I like Jingling Joe Jingles, okay? I think the Johan pick was amazing, especially just best player available at where they got. The only other player that I thought, if they didn't get Johan, I would have gotten Liam McNeely. That was my pick if they weren't going. But Johan's perfect because it really gives you a potential Gobert successor. And then they also got Rocco Zikarsky, Rocco Zikarsky was supposed to be a first-round pick. That's going to be a great pickup. And you guys know I'm a huge Enrique Freeman fan since I saw him at Portsmouth 2 years ago. And technically it would be a year ago, but, he's last draft. And know his agent, know Enrique personally. So I know the whole University of one of my buddy works at Akron, and he's telling me like they're all stoked that I was covering him. Either way, so now that they have all these bigs, like I just feel like their front court's deeper than it's been in a while, especially with Zikarsky and Beringer. They're just huge, and they have long-term and options and guys who can contribute now. Yes, Nickeil Alexander was a guy who signed with the Hawks, but they were able to do a sign and trade, so they turned that into a trade exception, which is huge. Lou Garza was someone they let walk. And Jesse Edwards, they waived. Josh Minot, they declined his option. Clearly, those two guys, they just didn't believe were going to be long-term pieces. And this is a team that went 49-33. They lost in the Western Conference Finals to the Thunder 4-1. Anthony Edwards is an all-NBA player. Rudy Gobert did look like I don't want to say lost a step, but like he clearly, for the first time, I think Rudy kind of looked a little different. He's still great, and I think he's going to be motivated, but I think we all can see the light at the end of the tunnel about how much longer he has for this, career of his. And to me, I think the biggest thing is looking at the current situation and knowing that this team obviously has to be mindful of the future because of how young Anthony Edwards is. And Gobert anchoring a top 5 defense but showed signs of slowing down. Was smart that they got Johan and Rocco. They have 2 legit options. Reid is a guy who is a combo big, and getting him paid, who's your 6-man / could be a Julius Randle successor or a trade chip, or Randle is a trade chip. So I think despite a strong run last year, the Wolves fell short against the eventual champions, which is kind of what you always want to, like, the best way to lose is to lose in the playoffs to the eventual champs, because you could argue, well, we lost to the champs, so if we had beat them, we probably would be the champs. So the Wolves this offseason prioritized retaining size and building depth. Basically, they wanted to go out and get bigger and get deeper. And they paid both Randle and Reid, as I don't think there was any way, especially with how the Durant thing played out, with Durant basically shutting down, going to Minnesota. There was no, and I don't think trading for Randle and Reid, which would have been required for the rental of Durant, yeah, it gives you cap flexibility, but like there wasn't I think they were never going to get equal value, or there wasn't a player to package those 2 guys for that was like significantly better, that was going to make it worth it. And they let Nickeil Alexander-Walker walk because I think they understood that they have other positions, and Terrence Shannon looks like, and Jalen Clark, they're hoping are going to replace those minutes of his. And drafting the 2 centers suggests they're hedging against Rudy Gobert's aging curve. The bet is clear that Anthony Edwards is going to grow into a true MVP candidate this season, while Terrence Shannon Jr. and Jalen Clark step into bigger defensive roles, as they've shown they can hit their open threes. Now, the starting lineup, Mike Conley, which I'm very surprised we didn't do more at the point guard position. I know Rob Dillingham and Bones Highland are there, and so is Dante DiVincenzo. Anthony Edwards, Jaden McDaniels, Julius Randle, and Gobert round out the starting lineup. And really, I don't know what the bench is going to look like, because I think that's definitely up for debate. But I think the interesting part in all of this is that you could maybe argue this should be maybe broken down by positions, and you guys could discuss who should be, because I think DiVincenzo is the 6th man, but Rob Dillingham, Dante DiVincenzo, and Bones Highland are their true guards. Then their wings are Terrence Shannon Jr., Jalen Clark, and Johnny Juzang, who Johnny Juzang could be a surprising like guy who ends up being like a scoring kind of microwave off the bench for them, which he's shown the ability to do. Then you have at forwards, obviously, Mr. Leonard Miller, who we discussed earlier. They have Joe Ingles. I'm going to throw Naz Reid in there, Julius Randle, while the center position, combination of Rudy Gobert, Rocco, Joan Beringer, and of course, Mr. Enrique Freeman on a 2-way. So is Rocco Zikarsky. They do have one more 2-way spot opened up, so I wonder who's going to fill that, especially that it seems like Bones Highland was brought on because he's ineligible for 2-ways. So I still think this team has an elite defense with Gobert and McDaniels there, and even if Gobert's lost a step, I think with Beringer and Naz Reid, like I think there's enough guys on this roster to make up for, you know, Gobert getting a little older. They have superstar power in Anthony Edwards. They have depth at the front court and at the wing spots. I really think they have depth everywhere. The biggest question is like they don't have they do have a true point guard, but it's like Mike Conley's getting older. But behind that, it's questionable. They're going to go by committee, so I don't think it's that much of a worry. They're a strong rebounding team on paper, and just in general, Chris Finch does a good job. And Chris Finch is a great coach. I love Chris Finch, one of the best in the NBA, a great tacticianist, and just a guy who clearly understands how to adjust and, you know, build around what he's been given. And yes, they lost the perimeter stopper and a good shooter and secondary playmaker and Nickeil Alexander-Walker. And Mike Conley's age, 38, raises durability questions. Anthony Edwards has shown he can be a playmaker, but it's a bit turnover prone. While young guys like Dillingham are unproven in the playoffs, Chris Finch remains steady, emphasizing physical defense, half-court execution, and letting Anthony Edwards control pace. Chris Finch's challenge, managing minutes for veterans while finding developmental reps for the young guys. And Finch isn't on the hot seat, but expectations are higher after consecutive conference finals trips. Now, this is a team that is above the first apron, but below the second of the 207.8. They have a taxpayer mid-level exception of $5.7 million remaining, 5.1 of the biannual remaining that they can use in trades, and then they have a trade exception of 6.4 from Nickeil Alexander. With the Wolves being firmly in tax territory with a little bit of flexibility, their future draft capital is heavily encumbered through 2032, limiting trade leverage. So the thing is that the contracts are kind of stacked. So if they needed, they could hypothetically do the salary cap gymnastics that would be required of them by packaging certain contracts. So I think it's definitely interesting if you look at the whole situation, because they're a team that I think is obviously trying to make it to the championship. They went out and got themselves an athletic 7-foot center with a huge wingspan that looks like a mobile rim protector with untapped offensive upside, viewed as Gobert's long-term successor. And he was a guy playing for Civita in Slovenia, like actually in a professional basketball league, contributing minutes. Then they have a 7'3" Australian teenager who's got raw tools, a project big, but the size and rim presence make him a long-term developmental project worth monitoring. And obviously the undersized big from Akron, high motor rebounding specialist who looks like his three-point shots coming through, and Enrique Freeman. Terrence Shannon Jr. is going to be the two-way wing who could soak up Nickeil Alexander Walker's defensive minutes with Jalen Clark. Rob Dillingham's a second-year rookie, a second-year player coming off a rookie year where he didn't really play, who is going to bring pace and creativity off the bench if he gets minutes. And Leonard Miller, now entering, year 3, 4, is going to be someone who's going to become a versatile rotation forward if he consistently develops. Edwards is entering superstardom. He's a guy who's probably going to be a 30-point per game scorer. His next step is distributing and facilitating more effectively and less turnovers. And if he improves his playmaking and just becomes efficient, and just does everything that we expect him to do, he's going to be pushing top 5, top 3 player status and elevate Minnesota into title favorites. So how far can the Wolves go? They're firmly a playoff team, but their ceiling depends kind of on this point on the growth of Edwards and the young players. If a final berth isn't out of the question, I think anything less than a conference finals is a disappointment. But they'll need health, defensive buy-in, and young players stepping up to survive a loaded West. So will Beringer or Dillingham contribute? Will Mike Conley hold up at nearly he's a few years off from 40. And does the front office leverage Nickeil Alexander Walker's trade exception to address, secondary shot creation and perimeter defense? And at 33 and expensive, will Rudy Gobert show that he can still sustain being their defensive anchor? This is a team that I expect to win at least 50 games, return to the conference finals, especially if Edwards makes the MVP leap. Worst case, aging backcourt, lack of a perimeter defense caps them at a first-round exit. Overall, Minnesota should be a top 5 seed in the West again. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe. What are your predictions and thoughts? Peace out, guys.